So you were promised practical advice from me, and what you're going to get mostly at first is more philosophical advice. Good luck getting a job with it. And then I'll go into some practical recommendations. So as far as the way we think about MOOCs in libraries, I'm afraid that sometimes we worry too much about the motivations of those who are providing MOOCs and other forms of alternative education. And what I'd like to do is sort of acknowledge up front the possibility and maybe even the likelihood that there are people offering MOOCs who want nothing but to make money. Some of these may actually be people who are conscious enemies of traditional higher education. And I'm not saying that motives don't matter, but while the motives of these folks are not entirely irrelevant, I think that it's important that we not be distracted by them when we think about what the future holds for us. The thought pattern that I use when I catch myself going down this road is to just remind myself that real life is not a movie, real life is not a novel in which you can assume that the person with the blackest heart is ultimately going to meet the worst fate. In real life, people and initiatives fail or succeed for reasons that have nothing to do with whether or not they're good people or bad people. So when it comes to making strategic decisions for ourselves, whether we're publishers or educators or librarians, discussions of the motivations behind MOOCs, I think, tend to be more distracting than useful. The reality is, I think, that MOOCs are emerging in a real marketplace of time and attention, and one in which students have to make difficult economic decisions. And the impact that MOOCs are having, and I think that they will continue to have in the future, doesn't hinge on whether or not we think MOOCs are a good idea. But it hinges on whether or not MOOCs solve a real problem for real people at a price that they will accept. A price in terms of money and a price in terms of time and attention. Now, there is a real problem. The real problem is that traditional higher education is very expensive. It's expensive in terms of money, and it's expensive in terms of time and attention. And an awful lot of people want it. There's the problem. To some degree, the people who want higher education want pure learning in order to improve themselves, in order to learn about things that are interesting to them, in order to become better people. But they also want certification. And currently, MOOCs do a better job of providing the former than they do of providing the latter, but that is going to change. Now, it's too soon to say exactly what's going to happen with MOOCs, but right now, I do think it's safe to say that traditional higher education's monopoly on post-high school education is eroding. And I'm concerned that we're wasting a lot of time and energy either evangelizing about MOOCs or demonizing them. And I think the reality is that the MOOC is a tool. It seems clear to me that MOOCs are here to stay because there's absolutely no reason for MOOCs to disappear. So I don't think the question is whether MOOCs are going to usher in the great day of an educational utopia or whether they're going to destroy the brains of our children. The question is, what do we do with this tool? How can we best use this tool to provide as much good in the world as possible? So with those questions and that sort of philosophical background in mind, speaking as a librarian, how is it that, or what is it that we as librarians should be thinking about when we're thinking about MOOCs? Why should we care about MOOCs? Now, apart from the question of libraries providing MOOCs, which is a wonderful topic, but one that I want to bracket for a second, for right now I want to talk about what is it, supposing that the university at which I'm a librarian starts going down the MOOC road, what does that university's MOOC behavior imply for impacts on the library itself in the course of its normal work? First of all, we in libraries normally restrict access to online information resources to currently enrolled students and staff and faculty, obviously. That's what our license terms require us to do, And the number of people that fit in that population is very often what defines the price that we pay for access to those online resources. However, we don't typically restrict access to our research services to people who are currently enrolled students or staff or faculty. Anybody can walk into the library and walk up to the reference desk and usually expect to get some kind of service. Now, that fact doesn't apply so much to MOOCs because most of the people enrolled in a MOOC are probably not going to be people in a position to walk into the library and come up to the reference desk. However, it's also true of telephone reference and reference chat services. We don't typically authenticate people who call us up or who send us a question over chat. We will typically provide that access to anybody. MOOCs, to the degree that they take hold and become prominent on our institutions, in our institutions, could very quickly force us to do one of two things: either to change that practice and to begin enforcing some kind of authentication, or to scale up. And scale is, I think, one of the great unexplored problems that we have in academic libraries when it comes to research assistance and traditional reference services. I've said this before, and I will probably say it 100 times again. The reason that we think our reference services work is that so few people that we're supposed to be serving actually try to use them. If, in fact, our reference services succeeded at serving, in my case, 32,000 students, they would immediately fall apart. MOOCs could force us to finally confront that issue and figure out a way to deal with it. And I want to emphasize, this is not a new issue. Scale is an old issue that we've just avoided confronting, I think. This is another interesting question for us in libraries, whether sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And what I mean by that is that we in libraries, I find, tend to think that open access is a really wonderful idea as long as it threatens the traditional business of publishers. Once we start talking about open access solutions such as MOOCs that threaten the traditional business of higher education and libraries, all of a sudden we start getting very grumpy about openness. And I'll go one step farther and say that in my experience, the people who are most enthusiastic about OA in the scholarly publishing arena also seem to be the grumpiest about the concept of MOOCs in the higher education arena. Whereas those who take a more measured stance on openness are also, I find, a little more open-minded to the idea of MOOCs and the good and the bad that they can do. I think that one thing that we will find in libraries is that at institutions where there is more enthusiasm for the development and administration of MOOCs, there may also be more administrative pressure in the direction of open access policies or even mandates. Because obviously, locally produced open resources are going to be more useful in the MOOC environment than resources that are behind toll access walls or, and restricted by traditional copyright. So, this is my last slide. What do I think we in libraries ought to be doing right now? Three general categories with three fairly specific recommendations. The first one is, and Lynn, what Lynn has done at Wake Forest is such a perfect example of this. I think somebody ought to make a documentary film about what she and her crew have done in regard to MOOCs. We need to be, if in fact we in libraries believe that going down the road of MOOCs is a good idea, then we need to be taking the opportunity to show leadership. You know, I can't say anything more except that look at what Lynn has done. All of us could be asking ourselves, how much of what we traditionally think of as bibliographic instruction could be turned into a MOOC that anybody, either on our campus or off our campus, could take advantage of? I think we also need to be looking for opportunities that the softening of the ground that MOOCs represent, we need to be looking at opportunities that softening provides. Personally, I suspect that MOOCs are going to destroy the traditional textbook market long before they destroy the traditional higher education market. Partly because traditional textbooks are already kind of on the ropes. in a way that higher education isn't yet, but partly because the MOOC has the capability to perform a function very similar to textbooks, whereas the MOOC is not yet, I don't think, in a position to replace an awful lot of the desirable functions of a college experience. If, in fact, MOOCs pose a threat to traditional textbook publishing, libraries, I think, are in an unusually strong position to take advantage of that and to help that happen. And then the third thing that we need to do is take care. I believe very strongly in risk-taking. I also believe in due diligence. The Tony Robbins quote that Meredith used, I think, is worth considering here, where he said, the path to success is to take massive, determined action. That's absolutely true. What is not said in that quote is that is also the path to disastrous failure. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't take massive, determined action. It only implies the importance of due diligence. We need to know what we're getting into to a reasonable degree before we take the leap, and then I believe we need to take the leap. And I think I'll leave it at that.